Hello, fellow Rebel Capitals. Hope you're well. So we've got a lot going on in terms of the United States election. And this leads to a lot of questions. I mean, if the socialists, the Democrats, win the election or steal the election, it's a better way of saying it, will they implement capital controls? This is something that a lot of people are worried about. And I've heard my good friend Doug Casey talking about capital controls in the United States quite extensively on his podcast. As a matter of fact, just in Rebel Capitalist Pro, the other night, I had a member ask me about capital controls because they're very concerned over the next 2, 3, 4 years that the United States could put up barriers to you taking your money outside of the good old US of A if you choose to implement maybe a plan B. Or maybe you decide you're not being treated that well. Or maybe you're part of a trucker protest. Or maybe they implement mandates in the future and you don't agree with that and you want to bounce for a while. And you want to take some of your purchasing power with you. Could the government step in and say no? Or could the government weaponize capital controls? This, in my view, is far more likely. The probabilities are higher. I don't think they're going to implement capital controls because they need the dollars, but they're going to possibly implement capital controls because they want to punish you for being bad. They want to punish you for wrong speak. You say something online that's naughty. Or maybe in the next lockdown, you say that this isn't a good idea. You stand up for freedom, liberty, free market capitalism, for heaven's sakes. And maybe you say that online, and they need to show you who's boss. They need to teach you a lesson. Again, just like they taught the truckers. Back then, they would just freeze their bank account. Well, I guess that in and of itself is a form of capital control, because at the end of the day, the net, the result is the exact same for you. And that's that you can't access your purchasing power, whether your bank account is frozen or Kamala comes in and just steals your money because she believes that she deserves it more than you do, or the government deserves it more than you do, or again, I think the highest probability is they're doing this to teach you a lesson. So let's get into, first of all, this great question we got in Rebel Capitalist Pro. So this is, if you guys aren't members, you can check it out at georgegamma.com/pro. But every Sunday night, I do a live stream Q&A where the members can ask me any question they want, and I answer it to the best of my ability. And Lynn Alden does these, Chris McIntosh, Brent Johnson, Patrick Sresna, and Hartman. Okay, so last Sunday night, I got this question. What are your thoughts on capital controls coming to the United States? Where would you place the probabilities of this happening over the next 12 to 24 months, 24 to 36 months? Other than U.S. and Colombia, where would you place your liquid funds? Any idea what Barnes, he's referring to Robert Barnes, would advise if he believed capital controls are around the corner? So this really got me thinking, what would I do? And now let's go over to this recent article from Doug, or Nick Giambruno, that works with Doug over at International Man, where they're talking about this subject of capital controls. Now, I want to be clear. I think the probability of them implementing the typical type of capital controls that governments implement because they don't want money fleeing the country or they need those dollars for XYZ reason, I think that's very low. That's as close to a zero probability. I mean, that's right up there with them defaulting on treasuries by not paying them, an outright default, especially over the next 36 months. But it isn't to say that the probability is near zero that they freeze your bank account because you say something naughty, or that you do something naughty. Or maybe we get to a certain point with AI that you even think it's like Minority Report, that you even think something that you shouldn't. And we all know that people that stand up for freedom, liberty, and free market capitalism, well, they're the next round of domestic terrorists, right? The deplorables. What's the difference between a deplorable and a domestic terrorist? What's the difference between a domestic terrorist and the truckers up in Canada? Well, they're the exact same thing. That's what Justin Trudeau comes out and says, well, look, they're all Nazis. They're all fascists. He's dehumanizing these people. And as a result, they have their purchasing power frozen. You see, to me, that's much, much more likely. And that is something I am very, very, very concerned about, especially George Gann with his YouTube channel and the types of things I say here that, quite frankly, are often anti-government. I mean, you guys know that are hardcore fans that have been around since the beginning of this channel, that YouTube took down this channel in 2021. I had no strikes, no warnings, nothing. And YouTube took it down. And they took it down for a video that I did on the main doctor. I can't even say his name. It's like Voldemort in Harry Potter. But the main doctor, the guy with the glasses that talks like this and might have been responsible for the gain of function research that we had in China. The guy I'm talking about? Okay. So because I did a video criticizing this person, well, YouTube completely took my channel down. That's just one example. Now, thanks to Joe Rogan, I got it back up within the matter of 8 hours. But for most people that want to stand up against this tyranny, or this type of tyranny that we will inevitably have in the future, especially if the Democrats / socialists win / steal this election, then this is my big concern. So it isn't, again, to be very, very clear, it isn't necessarily capital controls for the sake of, oh, we need to keep dollars in. It's capital controls for the sake of, we need to keep you in. And we need to punish you for not wearing a mask. Or we need to teach you a lesson for saying something that you shouldn't have said. We need to teach you a lesson for spreading misinformation and disinformation. And at a certain point, even talking about the central bank. I mean, I don't know if you guys have followed the story, but in Australia right now, they're trying to implement a law, a censorship law, that would make it illegal for you to say anything negative about their central bank. Because the way they're framing it, as if it would be detrimental to the stability of the local monetary system. And therefore, you are a domestic terrorist. And therefore, we should freeze your bank account. And therefore, if you do try to leave the country, because you want to tell Australia to pound sand, well, fine, you can do that, but you just can't take your money with you. Or if you do, you're going to have to pay a 50% exit tax. This is what I see as a strong possibility within the next, let's just say, 5 years, due to the governments becoming more authoritarian and more tyrannical and more anti-free speech, freedom, and liberty, and free market capitalism. Let's get to this article from Doug, or Nick GM Bruno, just to be clear here. The carnage always comes by surprise. First of all, title, capital controls are coming. The carnage always comes by surprise. Often on an otherwise ordinary Saturday morning, the government declares a surprise bank holiday, shuts all the banks. It imposes capital controls, stops citizens from taking their money out of the country. And this is just a perfect way to describe it. It's like cash sniffing dogs, which make drug sniffing dogs look friendly, show up at airports. At the point, the government is free to help itself to as much of the country's wealth as it wants. It's an all-you-can-steal buffet. And GM Bruno thinks that, and I know Doug echoes this, thinks that it's inevitable in the United States. So they talk about why governments impose capital controls. With capital controls, the thief is trying to block all exits so you can't reach safe ground. And I believe they're blocking the exits just to punish you for wrong speak or wrong think, or who knows, maybe even wrong vote. You voted for that Trump guy? Well, look, anyone that would vote for someone who's the equivalent of the German leader in the 1930s should have their bank account frozen and should not be able to leave the United States. Because we need to keep our eye on you, Mr. Domestic Terrorist. In fact, we should probably take your passport as well. Regardless of the initial catalyst, capital controls help the government trap money. And this is where I'd slightly disagree. It's not trap money in the country, it's trap humans in the country. A government can usually convince people that moving money offshore or investing in foreign assets is only for rich tax evaders, unpatriotic. Of course, that's going to be the narrative they're trying to push along with the mainstream media. I completely agree with that. So here they list the types of capital controls that we could see in the United States. I wanted to focus on this one because this is one that I think is the highest probability. Another tactic is taxing money transfers out of the country. Now, they're not going to do it for everybody. They're just going to do it for people that deserve it. The people that aren't contributing to the greater good. In fact, they're talking badly about the government. How dare you do that? When the government is just this altruistic servant of society at large. And anyone that would throw stones at the power of the government or its ability to censor wrong think or wrong vote or wrong actions, anyone that would stand up against the benevolence of the government is someone that needs to be punished. Now, we might not put them in jail. Well, that's probably coming too. The very least thing that we can do is charge them. Well, it's just a fine, right? It's a fine for, it's like not wearing your mask. Or it's like going outside and not having the medicine, right? You are a danger to society. And therefore, we need to do something to incentivize compliance. This is you see this narrative. I mean, you see how it can come to fruition very easily. All right. So the taxation of the money that you have, or just have to pay a fee or whatever, and especially if you want to take it outside of the country because you want to get out of the insanity, well, you might be able to leave, assuming they don't take your passport, but your money's staying here because it's the punishment. It's your penance that you need to pay. So they talk about capital controls in the past, and basically they're using the example of Roosevelt taking the gold for dollars and revaluing it, basically stealing purchasing power, which I guess is the same thing. And then they continue to prohibit the ownership of gold until 1974. I wanted to highlight this because as I was going through that question from the Rebel Capitalist Pro member, I was trying to think, what would I do? What would I do? And in essence, I've already done a lot of what I would do if I was concerned about this in the United States. So obviously, number one, you want to get assets or purchasing power outside of the purview or outside of the grasp of the Democrats / socialists. Or look, who knows? It might be the Republicans in 10 years. Just the bottom line, the central planners, authoritarians, those who want to implement tyranny on their subjects. This is how they look at the normal average Joe and Jane. It's these people. And sometimes they're Republicans, sometimes they're Democrats. Right now in U.S. history, I would argue they're Democrats. But again, in 5, 10 years, who knows? What happens if you're too late? International man goes over this. Capital controls are almost always a prelude to something worse. And this, I could not agree more. If they implement this, or maybe even when they implement this system of punishment, then what's to stop them from taking it 1, 2, 3, 4 steps further? The answer, not much. That's a very, very, very slippery slope. And by the way, I personally think we jumped on to that slippery slope during the cerveza sickness and the power that we extended the government to lock everyone in a cage and in some areas force people to get the medicine and force it to put it into their kids just to allow their kids to go into a restaurant, for heaven's sakes, or to get on a plane. And they go, what can you do about it? Simple solution. Place some of your savings outside your home country by setting up a foreign bank account. Now, I would do this, but I'd also, you know, what's interesting is I was in Ecuador when I retired, or after I retired. This would have been 2013, 14. It was just prior to me coming to Colombia. And they did the same thing. Well, they actually implemented capital controls where they started charging you like 5 or 10% just for taking your money out of the country. I'm like, no, that ain't happening. So what ended up, you go back to that time, and the result of this, or my decision-making process, was, no, that ain't happening, and I'm going to take my money out of the country in a way where they can't get their greedy paws on it. So I won't go into what I did. I don't want to incriminate myself in public on a YouTube video, but I have personal experience with this, and it ain't fun. And you definitely want to be prepared. At the end of the day, what's your downside? Let's just assume that all you do is set up a foreign bank account. Okay, great. What's your downside? There is none. You're prepared. It helps you sleep well at night. But what I would do is I would set up a foreign bank account, but I would also, I don't know that I'd want to have a lot of purchasing power there. I'd probably want to have the majority of my purchasing power in gold, really, and probably in Bitcoin as well. If I'm specifically setting it up around a plan B. Now, we're not talking about portfolio and all that stuff and making money and investing. We're talking about insurance policy. We're talking about plan B to make sure that you increase and maintain your freedom and liberty moving forward. That's what we're talking about, okay? So I would definitely want a lot of gold. I'd want it in a jurisdiction that was as quote unquote safe as possible. And then if I did bounce out of the country because I thought, this, let's say I was part of the trucker movement, or let's say that you are part of a future trucker movement or the equivalent of, you want to get out of Dodge before they take your passport, you do so, and then you've got your gold, but then you'd want to sell some of that gold. Obviously, you need to take that purchasing power, turn it into cash, because when you're at location XYZ, as I demonstrated in Argentina, it's very rare to find a vendor that's going to take Bitcoin or gold. So you want a mechanism to be able to transfer that gold into purchasing power, the gold that you're not going to save, that you're using for your daily expenses. Or you'd want to do the same thing with Bitcoin. So that's why you have the bank account set up, because it makes that process much, much easier. So this was pretty much my answer to the person in Rebel Capital's Pro. But I take that back, because the major component of my answer wasn't just buying gold, Bitcoin, having a foreign bank account, but is also thinking about foreign real estate. Because let's just assume for a moment, well, we don't have to assume. You guys know that I have property right here in Colombia, in Medellin, where I'm talking to you from right now. So if I ever decided just to leave the United States for good, there's a very, very low probability, even if they were able to somehow get the Colombian government to freeze my bank account here in Colombia or something like that, it would be almost impossible for them to do the same thing with my apartment that's throwing off that cash flow, that's allowing me to support myself and maintain or even increase the level of freedom I had back in Kamalaville. So, I think the main point of the video is if you haven't thought about a plan B, the time to do so was yesterday. And if you didn't do it yesterday, the second best time to do it is today. Now, whether you go to International Man, whatever you do, you just got to start thinking about this stuff. You can't live life like an ostrich with your head buried in the sand if you're someone that values freedom, liberty, and free market capitalism. If you're a rebel capitalist. Now, if you just want to go along with the herd and get slaughtered with the rest of the sheep, well, then this isn't for you. And just keep what you're doing, keep on doing what you're doing with your 401k and having 100% of your net worth tied to the United States or whatever country you're in. Another option for you is a retreat that I'm doing here in Medellin, first of the year. We're calling it the Rebel Capitalist Retreat, and we're limiting it to 15 people. But what we're doing for these 15 people is we're having them come down. They're going to be prepared. If they want to, I'm going to have my assistant, Adriana, help them set up bank accounts. So it's for people that want to take action. It's not really for people that just want to think about this and complain about it. And also, we're going to have lawyers talking about how to set up investment visas. We're going to be doing real estate tours. We're going to be doing everything to take it from the idea phase into the reality phase. Unfortunately, I'm limiting it to 15 people. There's only one ticket left, just one. That's it. If you're interested, you can check out the details at georgegammon.com/retreat. This is the page that we have set up, and here's a video, and where I go into extensively like the itinerary and everything. Some of the people that are going to be here helping you out. Joaquin is my architect. He's going to be doing the real estate tour. Adriana, there she is, my assistant. She's going to be helping people set up a Colombian bank account. Barnes is likely going to be here helping people set up asset protection. Brent is going to be here talking about portfolio construction, Brent Johnson. Then some side stuff. We've got Josh talking about social media and some VIP guests that are also going to be here. Jeff Snyder. I'm sure we'll get him up there talking about some portfolio construction as well. And Tracy Shukart is going to be here talking about commodities. So it is personalized investing stuff, but it's more so helping you take action on setting up that plan B. So again, if you're interested, you can go to georgegammon.com/retreat. But regardless, even if you don't come down here to Medellin, you got to start thinking about this stuff now. All right, guys, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. As always, make sure that you are standing up for freedom, liberty, free market capitalism. See you in the next video.